Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something that might hit a little too close to home for some of us.
Oh, yeah. Definitely relatable.
It's all about digital detoxing.
Ooh, that's a good one.
We're taking a deep dive into an episode from the Creative Mind podcast that tackles this very topic. They called it Digital Detox, Living with Less Screen Time.
Catchy title.
And honestly, I think we could all use a little less screen time, right?
Well, according to this podcast, the average person spends over 7 hours a day staring at screens.
7 hours.
7.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But I mean, come on, is it really that big of a deal?
Well, the hosts of the podcast, Raymond Goyd, they make a pretty compelling case for why it is.
Okay, I'm listening.
They argue that all this digital stimulation, it actually impacts our well-being.
In what way?
They talk about how it can fuel anxiety, mess with our sleep, even stifle our creativity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they even bring up some research showing the negative effects of excessive screen time.
So it's not just about feeling less stressed. It's like there are these deeper, almost invisible consequences we don't even realize.
Right, exactly. And you know what really struck me? They talked about Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, like
Yeah.
the Apple guy.
Yep, the tech giant himself. Apparently he was super strict about his own kids' screen time.
Seriously.
Yeah,
That's kind of ironic, isn't it?
totally. And that's the point Raymond Goyd are trying to make. If someone like Steve Jobs, who practically built the digital world, saw the need for limits, shouldn't that tell us something?
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful argument. Okay, so let's say we're convinced we need to do a digital detox. But what's on the other side of that? Like, what's the payoff?
Well, the podcast argues it's not just about reducing stress or reclaiming time, though those are definitely perks. They frame it as a way to live more intentionally, to kind of get that mental space back, to focus on what really matters.
Makes sense. But how do we know it actually works? Is there evidence people actually benefit from this?
They actually bring up a great example in the podcast, Ariana Huffington,
The Huffington Post lady.
the one and only. She was basically living the always-on lifestyle, burning the candle at both ends, and she ended up collapsing from exhaustion.
Wow, okay, that's intense.
It was a major wake-up call for her. It totally changed her relationship with tech.
So what did she do? Like, how'd she go from tech-obsessed to tech-balanced, especially when her whole career was basically online?
Well, she started with some pretty simple but effective rules, like no devices in the bedroom, for one.
I like that.
She also scheduled specific times for checking emails instead of being on call 24/7.
So it's about creating boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily ditching tech altogether,
Yeah,
but getting back in control.
exactly. And you know what? It's actually inspiring because it feels doable. It's not about going off the grid and living like a hermit.
Right, it's just about being more mindful.
Exactly.
So how do we actually do that? Like, where do we even begin to detox in a world that's literally designed to keep us plugged in 24/7?
Well, that's a great question, and luckily Raymond Goyd have some practical advice on just that.
Okay, good, because I'm all ears.
We'll dive into those tips right after this. So before the break, we were talking about how to actually start detoxing in a world that feels so, well, wired.
Yeah, like it can feel a little overwhelming to even know where to start.
Right. Well, Raymond Goyd, in the podcast, they suggest starting with what they call tech-free zones.
Tech-free zones. That sounds kind of intense.
Yeah, it's actually simpler than it sounds. You just pick areas in your home, like maybe your bedroom or the dinner table,
Okay.
and you make a rule, no devices allowed.
Ah, I see. So you're reclaiming those spaces for, real-life connection and relaxation. Makes sense.
Exactly.
But what about when you're not in those zones? Like, how do you resist the urge to check your phone every 5 seconds when you're, out in the wild?
Well, they recommend actually scheduling specific times to unplug.
Like putting it in your calendar.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it's just for an hour. And during that time, do things that nourish your mind and body, like reading, going for a walk, journaling.
So it's not just about avoiding screens. It's about replacing that mindless scrolling with something meaningful.
Right. And that brings us to another big tip, turning off non-essential notifications.
Oh, man, the notifications. They're the worst.
I know, right? But do you really need to know every time someone likes your Instagram post or comments on a random textbook thread?
Probably not, but it's hard to resist.
Yeah.
Like, what's the harm in a quick peek?
The problem is those quick peeks add up and they keep us in this constant state of distraction. Our brains never get a chance to truly rest.
That's a good point. It's like
Yeah.
we're always on.
Right. And Raymond Goyd actually compare it to a slot machine where every notification is like a little gamble for our attention.
Ooh, that's a good analogy. Makes you realize how these apps are playing on our psychology.
Exactly. So less notifications, more real-life activities. And that leads us to another challenge. What if you feel like you've totally lost touch with your offline self?
Yeah, like what if you don't even know what you'd do with yourself if you weren't staring at a screen?
Well, that's where the idea of rediscovering old hobbies or exploring new ones comes in.
So like dusting off that old guitar or something.
Exactly. Remember all those things you used to love before the digital world took over?
Hmm. Yeah, maybe.
Huh.
But what if you don't have any hobbies or you feel like you've lost that spark? Like where do you even begin?
That's a great question. And it can feel a little daunting. Raymond Goyd, they suggest starting small. Just think about the things that make you curious.
Curious.
Yeah, like what have you always wanted to try but never made time for?
Hmm.
Could be something creative like photography or pottery or something active like hiking.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be this big elaborate thing.
Right. Even trying a new recipe or taking a walk in a different part of town can shake things up.
I like that. Just small steps to reawaken that curiosity.
And it's often easier to stick with something new if you have support. So another tip they had was find a buddy.
Like a digital detox buddy.
Exactly. Maybe a friend or family member who also wants to cut back on screen time. You can hold each other accountable, try new things together, and celebrate your successes.
I like that. It's like having a workout buddy, but for your mind and soul.
Right. And speaking of inspiration, the podcast actually shares some really cool stories of people who have successfully embraced digital detoxing.
Ooh, stories. I love stories, especially if they're about busy, successful people. It makes it feel more, doable.
Well, get this. One of the examples they highlighted was Bill Gates.
No way. The Bill Gates. Microsoft Bill Gates.
The one and only. Apparently, he takes regular think weeks where he completely disconnects from technology.
Wait, seriously? No emails, no phone calls, nothing.
Nothing. He spends that time reading, reflecting, generating new ideas.
Wow. So even someone like Bill Gates, who's practically synonymous with technology, sees the value in unplugging.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right?
It is.
And it just proves that digital detoxing isn't about rejecting technology altogether.
It's about finding that balance.
Exactly. But they don't just focus on high-profile examples like Bill Gates.
Good. Because I was about to say, easy for a billionaire to say, right?
Right. They also share stories of everyday people who have found their own ways to unplug. Like, there's a teacher who does a tech-free Sunday with her family.
A whole day.
Yep. They go hiking, play board games, just enjoy each other's company.
That's awesome. It's a good reminder that digital detoxing can also be about strengthening connections.
Absolutely. And all these stories really highlight that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to digital detoxing.
It's about finding what works for you.
Exactly. But even with all this amazing advice and inspiring stories, there's still a big question. How do we actually make this a lasting change? How do we move beyond the initial detox and create a healthier relationship with technology long term?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And luckily, that's exactly what Raymond Goyd tackled in the last part of their podcast episode.
Okay, good. Because I'm definitely ready for those long-term solutions.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The benefits, the tips, the inspiring stories. But I think the big question is, how do we make it stick? How do we turn this digital detox into a lasting lifestyle change?
Yeah, that's the real challenge, right? It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a detox, but then life happens and we slip back into old habits.
Totally. So how do we avoid that? How do we make this sustainable?
Well, one thing that Raymond Goyd emphasized was the importance of regular check-ins with yourself.
Like self-reflection time.
Exactly. But not just any self-reflection, it's about specifically asking yourself, how is my relationship with technology affecting me right now?
So being really honest with ourselves about the impact our digital habits are having.
Exactly. And once you have that awareness, you can start to make more conscious choices about your tech use.
Okay, I can see that. But what if we slip up? I mean, let's be real. We all have those days where we end up scrolling for hours.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where self-compassion comes in. This is a journey, not a destination. You're going to have days where you fall back into old patterns.
It happens to the best of us.
Right. The key is to not beat yourself up about it. Just acknowledge the slip-up, learn from it, and get back on track.
So consistency over perfection.
Exactly. And you know what else can help? Regularly revisiting your why. Like, remember what motivated you to do a digital detox in the first place. Was it to improve your sleep, reduce stress, be more present with loved ones?
It's easy to lose sight of those goals when you're in the thick of it.
Totally. So keep those goals front and center, especially when you're tempted to slip back into old habits.
Makes sense. Anything else?
One last thing they talked about was this idea of digital minimalism.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. What was it again?
It's basically about being intentional about the technology you allow into your life,
Yeah.
asking yourself which apps and devices actually add value, and which ones are just clutter, distractions, or even sources of stress.
So it's kind of like Marie Kondoing your digital life. If it doesn't spark joy, get rid of it.
Exactly. Declutter your digital world just like you would your physical space. Unsubscribe from those newsletters you never read. Delete those apps you haven't opened in months. Curate your social media feeds to only follow accounts that inspire you.
I love that. Taking back control and being the curator of your own digital experience.
That's what it's all about.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap things up. It seems like the key takeaway here is that a digital detox isn't about becoming some kind of tech-hating hermit.
No, not at all.
It's about finding that balance, making sure technology serves us, not the other way around.
Right. And remember, it's a journey. There will be ups and downs. But the more we practice being mindful and intentional about our tech use, the more we can reap the benefits of a more balanced, fulfilling life.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into digital detoxing. And who knows, maybe we'll all be inspired to put our phones down a little more often and engage with the world around us.
I hope so. It's a beautiful world out there.
It really is. Until next time.